It is 3:15 in the morning. The room is warm. The air is thick and still. And you are lying there wide awake, gripping the edge of your blanket like it is the only thing keeping you from falling apart. You are not cold. You know that. The temperature outside hasn't dropped below 80 degrees in a week. But here you are, pulling that thin layer of fabric over your chest, tucking it under your chin, wrapping it around your shoulders like armor. You have done this every single night for as long as you can remember, and you have never once been able to explain why. Most people would call it a harmless habit, a strange little quirk, something they would laugh about and never think about again. But for the INFJ, this specific nighttime ritual is not a quirk. It is not random. And it is certainly not about warmth. It is about something far more desperate, something that reaches all the way back to the earliest, most unprotected years of your life. To understand what the blanket really means, you have to understand what happens to an INFJ's nervous system long before the lights go out. During the day, your mind runs a relentless, high-powered sensory operation that most people cannot even begin to comprehend. Powered by introverted intuition and extroverted feeling, you passively absorb micro-expressions, shifts in vocal tone, unspoken tensions between strangers, the precise emotional temperature of every room you enter. You do not choose to do this. There is no off switch. Your brain simply lacks the neurological filter that allows ordinary people to ignore what they do not want to see. A colleague pauses for half a second too long before answering a question, and your mind has already constructed 3 possible reasons for the hesitation, ranked them by probability, and begun preparing emotional contingency plans for each. A friend laughs a little too loudly at dinner, and somewhere deep inside your skull, an involuntary algorithm is already dissecting the hollow frequency of that laugh, cross-referencing it with the sadness you noticed in their eyes 2 weeks ago, calculating whether they are masking a crisis they are too proud to admit. You process all of this silently, constantly, without anyone around you ever noticing. By the time night falls, your central nervous system is vibrating at a frequency that most people only experience during genuine emergencies. Your brain has spent 16 consecutive hours running the emotional equivalent of air traffic control for everyone in your orbit. The metabolic cost is staggering. The cognitive exhaustion is physical. And now, in the dark, you are supposed to simply close your eyes and rest. But rest requires one thing that the INFJ brain is fundamentally incapable of providing on its own: a sense of boundary, a clear, definitive signal that says the external world is no longer your responsibility, that the scanning can stop, that the invisible emotional labor is finally, temporarily over. This is the precise clinical function of the blanket. Psychologists who study sensory processing have documented a phenomenon called deep pressure stimulation. When distributed, gentle weight is applied across the surface of the body. The nervous system interprets it as a signal of safety. The pressure triggers a measurable release of serotonin and dopamine while simultaneously suppressing cortisol, the hormone responsible for your chronic state of hypervigilance. In neurological terms, the blanket is doing what a firm, sustained embrace does. It is telling your sympathetic nervous system, the ancient fight-or-flight machinery that has been screaming at full volume since you woke up, that the threat is gone, that the perimeter is secure. For the INFJ, this is not comfort. It is medicine, but the blanket serves a second, far more psychologically devastating purpose. It is a physical barrier between you and the world that spent the entire day demanding your empathy without ever offering any in return. You wrap yourself in it because, for the first time in 16 hours, you are allowed to stop giving. You are allowed to exist without performing the exhausting role of the calm, unshakable emotional anchor that everyone around you has come to depend on. And yet, even behind that barrier, the machine does not stop. Every INFJ knows what happens the moment the pillow touches their head. The conversations begin replaying, not casually, not as simple memories, but as forensic reconstructions. You hear the exact syllable where your voice cracked during an argument 3 days ago. You feel the precise micro-expression of disappointment that flickered across someone's face for less than a second at lunch. You analyze what you said, dismantle what you should have said, and rehearse what you will say tomorrow to repair damage that probably does not even exist. Your mind is a courtroom that never adjourns, and you are simultaneously the prosecutor, the defendant, and the jury. Neuroscientists call this cognitive state the default mode network in overdrive. The INFJ community has a quieter, more honest name for it: the owl's vigil. You lie awake not because you are not tired, but because your brain refuses to stop protecting you from threats that have already passed. The blanket becomes a sensory isolation chamber. It dampens the input. It creates a cocoon of controlled stimulation that gives your overloaded prefrontal cortex exactly one consistent, predictable signal to process instead of 10,000 chaotic ones. But all of this leads to a question that very few people are willing to ask out loud. Why does the INFJ brain operate at this punishing level of awareness in the first place? Why can you not simply turn it off the way everyone else seems to? The clinical answer is uncomfortable, and it rarely has anything to do with genetics. Psychological research on individuals who exhibit extreme hypervigilance, compulsive empathy, and rigid sensory boundaries has revealed a consistent pattern. The vast majority did not develop these traits by accident. They were forged in childhoods defined by emotional unpredictability or neglect. Many INFJs grew up in households where the emotional climate could shift without warning. A parent whose mood could turn from warm to volatile in the space of a single sentence. A home where silence was never peaceful because silence meant something was about to break. As a child, you could not afford the luxury of ignorance. You learned to read the room before you learned to read a book. You could tell by the sound of a car door slamming in the driveway whether dinner would be quiet or catastrophic. You memorized the weight of footsteps on the stairs, the specific rhythm that meant calm, and the slightly faster cadence that meant danger. You cataloged the exact angle of a parent's jaw when they were about to say something they could not take back. You became a human seismograph, calibrated to detect emotional earthquakes before the first tremor. By the age of 7 or 8, you possessed an emotional vocabulary that most adults never develop in an entire lifetime. This was not a gift. It was a survival mechanism built by a terrified child who had no other way to keep themselves safe. What psychologists now call traumatic intelligence is this exact adaptation: the extraordinary ability to read people, predict behavior, and navigate emotional minefields with surgical precision, all developed not from curiosity, but from fear. Your legendary intuition, the one that everyone around you admires and secretly relies on, was never a superpower. It was a shield forged in a war you fought alone, long before you were old enough to understand what war meant. And every night, when you pull that blanket over your body in a warm room, you are performing the same ritual that the child version of you performed decades ago. You are building a perimeter. You are constructing the only barrier you have ever trusted. You are telling yourself, in the only language your nervous system understands, that the world outside has been shut out, that for these few hours you do not have to scan, you do not have to anticipate, you do not have to carry. If you are lying under a blanket right now, even as the air around you is warm and still, understand this. You are not broken. You are not strange. Your brain simply built an extraordinary, beautiful fortress to protect a mind that feels everything in a world that feels almost nothing. The weight of the fabric on your skin is not a weakness. It is the quiet, nightly proof that you survived something most people will never have to face. If you are watching this from your silent corner tonight, leave a comment with the word shield. Let us know you are here, wrapped in your own quiet vigil. Subscribe to the Rare Axis to continue decoding the hidden architecture of your mind. And tonight, when the world finally goes silent, let yourself rest. You have earned it.